Welcome, everyone. Glad you could join us here today. Today, we're going to be talking about becoming world-class, boosting your employee productivity with L&D. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar, and we are going to share this webinar back with you via email once it's available. We're also going to have an additional worksheet available, so we can send all that stuff your way so you can dive deeper into these topics. We do recommend if you're connected to us live today, go ahead and connect with your computer audio, because that's going to give you, it's going to lower those chances of the technical difficulties that we all know happens every time we do these kinds of things. At the end of the webinar, we are going to go through any questions that you all might have. So please feel free, as we're going through and having some discussion points, throw your questions there in the Q&A panel that you see here in GoToWebinar, and I'll answer those as we get around to them. And go ahead and throw those in as we're going, right? No need to wait till the very end. Throw those in there and we'll tackle them as they come in. Speaking of the end of the webinar, at the very end, we're going to send a quick, brief little survey your direction. Should take you 2 minutes or less. Please give us some feedback in there. We love hearing what you liked, what you didn't like, what we can do better, all that kind of stuff. So please send us some of that feedback so we know where to go with our next webinars and what we need to fix for the next stuff. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jeremy Price, and I'm a solutions architect here at Cloud Academy. What that means is in my day job, I do a lot of discussions with customers and our customer success managers here at Cloud Academy and our technical teams, and I talk to a lot of folks. But one of the things that I do a lot of is matching what Cloud Academy has with what our customers need. And that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about here today. I'm going to give you some things as we go through these discussion points. I'm going to give you some questions to think about. Now, you don't have to tell us the answer, right? We're not asking you to post your answer here in the chat. But what I do want you to do is to start thinking about how some of these things show up at your organizations, how your teams are impacted by some of the things that I'm going to talk about here, okay? The other thing that I want to point out for this is the information we're going to talk about today is gleaned from a lot of conversations with our customers. So I've kind of aggregated all of the different comments, all the different, ooh, if you do this, it's going to be great kinds of suggestions that we've heard from our customers. And that's what we're going to give you. It's kind of that high level set of ideas when it comes to boosting that employee productivity. All right, so let's dive right in here. The key thing that we know about employee productivity is learning is a really big part of that. So for our team members, for our employees, for the folks that we're working with to be more productive, one of the ways we can do that is help them be better at their job. So learn a new set of skills, learn a new technology, learn, whatever it takes to get to that next level, okay? How are we doing in that? How do we incentivize that learning and development? How do we take what is kind of a natural thing that we all do anyway, which is learning, and make that something that's kind of a first-class citizen within our organizations? Because there's one thing that I've learned in my 20 plus years in the tech industry. If you're not growing and learning new technologies, you're falling behind, right? Because tech is constantly changing, right? Okay, so what does that look like in the bigger picture? Well, we found 4 core concepts or categories that we've heard from customers and seen in their world-class learning organizations. I'm going to dive deeper into each one of these and give you some really concrete things to think about when you're building these. But at the end of the day, all of these are important, right? And you say, which one's the most important? Well, it's the one on the slide that I'm talking about right now. But really, you have to balance all these different pieces, right? But if you've got some stuff going on in all 4 different categories, you're probably hitting the nail on the head when it comes to creating that world-class learning organization. So let's dive in here. We're going to start with leadership, commitment, and objectives. Now, when it comes to learning, one of the things that you have to have in place in order for your organization to be a world-class learning organization is your leaders have to be committed. to this, right? So leadership, and that can be all the way down at, maybe a team manager level, all the way up to the CEO. What does learning look like for the leadership within your organization? How are they showing that learning is a priority, that it's rewarded, that it's valued at the organization? So creating that learning culture really is critical to have those leaders buy into it and walk the walk, honestly. This could take the form of, if you are working with cloud technologies, your leadership team could get some of those entry-level cloud certifications, or could, provide incentives for something like that. But it's that kind of stuff that helps people understand, yeah, this is valued and my leaders are doing it. Therefore, I can see how it fits for me. Here's some questions you can ask yourself about your current organization. So one, how is your leadership engaged and learning in the organization right now? Does that show up? If you were to ask, just grab any employee and say, hey, what are our leaders learning today? Would they be able to answer that? Another question you can ask, what are our leaders learning and how is that activity communicated? How do people find out about that? How does the rest of the folks learn what people are learning? Another thing that you need to be aware of here is defining those clear learning objectives. Now, I'm an engineer by background, and so the idea of figuring out where we're going before we start creating a solution makes a lot of sense to me. When it comes to learning objectives, though, one of the things that we really need to be conscious of is making sure that those align with our vision. What is the company vision? What are the strategic things that we're working on? And how do we align those learning objectives to those things? Okay. Some questions you can ask yourself about your organization. What are our current learning objectives? If you can't list them, probably means that's something you need to work on. And then how are we currently defining those learning objectives? Where do we capture those? How do we publish those? Who knows about them? And finally, what are our learning objectives aligned with? Sometimes we create some learning objectives of, you know what, we're moving to this cloud provider, so we need 50 people certified in it. That's a great goal, and that's a good learning objective. Make sure that that is aligned to that strategic pillar, right? Move it as high up as you can, because that's what gets the engagement. That's what gets folks excited about learning, is they can see how they fit into the longer term goals and into the broader picture of the organization. All right, so some really key things here. Get the leaders involved and make sure we know where we're going and we can communicate that with the folks who are learning. All right, next up is kind of the meatiest of the sections. Here we've got the learning culture and mindset, and I realize there's a lot of words on this slide. We're going to kind of walk through each one of these. First up, create a safe learning environment. Again, as an engineer, I learned a long time ago, you don't practice stuff in the production account, right? You don't go in there and oh, hey, let me see what happens when I turn this thing on, right? Create some environments, create some lab scenarios, create, from a technology perspective, create a safe space for folks to work, but also translate that into, the real world. How can people get access to the learning? How can they share ideas? How can they give feedback on what they're learning, the process of learning? How can they ask questions about this in that safe space? Because it's really important, when you tell somebody, hey, I need you to learn this. I need you to grow your career. I need you to grow your capabilities. It's important for them to know it's not a linear path to get there, right? It's going to bounce around. You're going to go learn this one, and maybe this topic made a lot of sense, but this one didn't. So it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for more resources. So create that safe space. A couple of questions for you on this one that you can ask about your organization. How is your current learning environment set up? Is it top down or bottom up? Right? Do you have the folks working on it and learning the stuff? Are they the ones pushing it? Or is this more of a leadership driven one? There's no right or wrong answer there. Just understand where you're coming from so you can understand where you want to go with it. Next up, how do we surface problems or suggestions for our learning environment? Is there a way for people to give feedback? Or is this, hey, here's the thing, go use the thing, right? Make sure that you have those feedback paths. And if you don't, figure out how you can put something like that in there. Okay, that's the safe learning environment. Next up, embrace a growth mindset. I don't know about you all, but I rarely do things right the first time. In fact, this whole presentation I had to rehearse a couple of times. Why? Because I have that growth mindset. I know that I'm going to mess some of the stuff up and I'm going to have to do it again. Same thing happens with learning. Like I mentioned on the previous one, it's not a linear path to get from A to B. It's not a linear path to say, Jeremy's a software developer, he needs to learn this technology, so just put this stuff in and he's going to go. Recognize that folks are going to get there in different ways. It's going to look different for a bunch of folks, and give them that space to experiment, that space to fail early, fail often, adjust, and go to the next thing. Okay. A couple of things to think about here, a couple of questions for you. How do we encourage growth and learning in our organization? How do we do that? What does that look like? Second, do we focus on the perfect learning environment, or do we expect to deploy and iterate? It may sound a little bit like a software developer. Yep, that's my background, right? We'll get some stuff out there, we'll let some people use it, we'll figure out what's working, and we'll iterate on it, right? That's in today's tech world, you kind of have to do it that way just because of the speed of tech and speed of learning. But that is a critical thing to implement in your learning organization, right? As we're encouraging people and building up the productivity of our employees, we have to make it so that they have that space to iterate. Next up, offer diverse learning opportunities. Now, I love doing in-person learning. It's one of my favorite things to do because I love meeting new people and I love talking about cool technology things. But recognize that, you know, different people learn differently and they engage with learning differently. So Cloud Academy is a great example. We've got courses that are available. Folks can watch recorded lectures, they can watch demos, they can interact with it that way. You can do some labs. You can leverage the exams to show that you've learned the material. All these are kind of different modalities for learning and engagement with those topics. So make sure that you offer those. Additionally, it's not just about the modalities, but also in terms of how they're engaging with, or like what they're engaging with on the material side of things. So mentorship programs, right? Who do I talk to? Is there a Slack channel that I can post this question in? Something like that. Providing and creating ways for folks to engage on that learning creates that diversity of learning and amplifies the learning. All right, a couple of questions for you on this one. How do we currently augment our learning with a variety of delivery methods, or do we? Second question, do we mix formal learning with informal learning? You know, a lot of times learning about a technology, right? Here are the details about that technology. But then the informal learning is I can go and build a thing using that technology. I can go try it out, right? Or I can go grab a cup of coffee with somebody and pick their brain about the technology. That's that formal and informal learning. Both are important, okay? Next up, allocate dedicated time for learning. This is really hard for folks to do, right? Because if you're on a critical project or you're working on a big thing, it's hard to carve out time to learn the new stuff. Right? It's almost kind of the bird in hand versus doing the bush, right? I'm looking at learning this thing, which is a strategic thing. It's going to get me somewhere else. It's going to help me do something better, faster, cheaper. But I also have my project manager sending me emails and Slack messages saying, Jeremy, where is this thing? Okay. What I would encourage you to do at your organizations is make sure that people know there is time for you to learn, and here's what it looks like. And it might look different for different teams. So some teams, it might be an hour or two a week. Some teams, it might be a lot longer than that because maybe they're doing, you know, some sort of new technology, right, or a migration or something like that. So make sure that your folks know that there is time for them to learn. Okay, I hear a lot of organizations that say, oh, well, we provide the stuff, like we provide a Cloud Academy license, they have to go off and learn on their own time. That can work, but it's not as effective as it is to say, here's that Cloud Academy license, here's that learning resource, and here's an hour or two each week to go and consume that. Okay, so allocate that dedicated time. Questions for you on this one to think about. One, do we provide time for our organization to learn, and is that common across the organization? Right? Do we have a policy around that? Does everybody know what that means, or that it's understood? And then another question for you, how do employees request time to learn? How's it approved? Is it a very formal process, or is it just a, hey, I got to go learn this thing. Can I have a couple hours? Great. Okay, I'll do that, right? Maybe it's just a Slack message or two. Along the lines of this one, the dedicated time for learning, we have a customer that I've worked with who on their website, when you go to the career section and we're hiring and all of that, they actually have it all detailed right there. Learning is such a part of what they do that it tells you, here's how much learning time you get. Here's why it's important to us, right? It's detailed right there. So before you even, put in an application to work for them, you know how much they value learning. So imagine how much that translates into the folks that work there. Okay. The last one down there is encourage knowledge sharing. With this one, it's all about making it, providing the space, providing the tools, providing the area for folks to talk to each other, setting up things like workshops and brown bags. In a previous company I worked for, we had a whole series of brown bags all around a certain technology that we were moving to. So basically I'd go and I'd learn a thing and I'd try out a couple of things, and then I'd do a quick brown bag conversation on it, right? Folks would come in, they'd eat their lunch, and I'd talk about what I built. Nothing really formal about it. It was all about that knowledge sharing. And it doesn't have to be your most experienced folks that share, right? Now you can build folks up in their presentation skills, right? You can get a junior engineer to come in and talk about a thing, or whatever makes sense, but make that space for the knowledge sharing and encourage it, incentivize it, right? So, maybe somebody gets a cool Cloud Academy t-shirt or hoodie or something like that when they do a presentation. At one of the places that I used to work, we had kind of a knowledge sharing sort of thing. And after you were all done, you got like a $15 DoorDash card or something like that, right? So you could go and grab a bite to eat, a gift card or something, right? It doesn't have to be much, but encourage that. Put the pieces in place for that to happen, and then encourage your folks to do that, okay? Wikis, discussion forums, whatever it is that makes sense, right? Could be a weekly meeting of, friends of this technology. Folks just get together and chat about it, okay? So encourage you to do that. That's what's going to really amplify a lot of the formal learning. So going back to what I was talking about there with the formal and the informal learning, encouraging that knowledge sharing, that can be a part of that informal learning path. A couple questions for you on this one to think about. Do you have a community of practice around learning? What does that look like? Can you identify some champions in your organization to help build those knowledge sharing opportunities? Are there folks who are really passionate about technology or tools or the way that you do business? And can they build things up to help make sure that that is shared across the organization? And finally, how do you foster that grassroots learning and knowledge sharing in your organization? How do you create the space for that? Hey, is that a part of the dedicated time for learning? Is it apart from that? Is it, creating a Slack channel? What resources do you need to put in place for that? And thinking about what that looks like for your organization, right? If you're an organization of not many people, it may look a lot more open-ended than if you're an organization of a lot of folks, right? Where you need to potentially put in some more structure to help that be successful. All right, so that's the 5 things on this page. This is a key part of this. Learning culture and mindset is critical to helping folks get into learning as a part of what they're doing to help them increase that productivity. Next up, number 3 in our categories, incentives and evaluation. Now, this one gets a little bit sticky sometimes because we want to quantify and we want to encourage incorporating learning into performance evaluations. When it's done right, this one's amazing. It's really handy because it's a check-in for folks saying, hey, I wanted to learn this thing. Here's how far I got on it. Here's how far I hope to get. Let's keep moving. But the challenge here is if your performance reviews are great, this one fits really well. If you need to work on your performance reviews, do that first, okay? But make sure that there is a conversation, that there is time and incentive to have the conversation about learning, okay? What is their growth? Where are they going? Where do they want to be? And how do we get there? Okay, and how is learning going to help us with that? Is it a concrete learning thing, or is this something that's just more of, hey, I need to do some more OJT? Okay, this adds to that continuous improvement, right? Measure where you are, measure where you want to be, and then figure out how to get between the two. And part of that shows up in performance reviews. Now, another asterisk on this one, don't make performance reviews the only time you talk about learning. Right? Make sure that it is a conversation between managers and employees, but a great checkpoint for this, for us to gather some data and understand where we are, is by incorporating that into performance reviews. A couple questions for you on that one. Is learning a first-class citizen in our performance reviews? Is it something that you talk about? Is it something that's brought up? Another question for you there. Do managers, employees, or both review the learning accomplishments in a performance review setting? Who brings that information to the table? Is that the employee who says, here's what I was trying to do and here's what I got done? Or is that the manager, right? Or is that both of them? The right answer is probably somewhere in the middle, right? Here's the manager saying, here's what we're expecting you to do, or here's what we plan to do. And then the employee kind of giving that feedback and having that conversation. Okay. Second thing down there is recognize and reward learning. Now, in some places, this is, like I said, a gift card or something like that, or some companies have point systems. Some of them, it's a badge. Some of them, it's recognition on an internal website. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this sort of stuff. At Cloud Academy, we have a really cool thing in Slack where when somebody has a great accomplishment, we recognize it there. You put a post in there, there's lots of GIFs, there's lots of emoji reactions, right? And it's a great way to recognize that learning has occurred. A lot of times that's with things like certifications, right? It's a great way to recognize that accomplishment. But at your organization, what does that look like? What can that recognition look like? Is there a way that you can reward that? Okay, so think about that. A couple of questions on there. How do we currently recognize learning accomplishments? What does that look like for our organization, right? What are you doing to recognize those learning accomplishments? Because I'll tell you, one of the ways to create a disincentive around learning is to have the learning occur, somebody hits a milestone, and that kind of occurs in a vacuum, right? We want to be able to recognize those accomplishments in the way that makes the employee feel valued. Okay. Another question on there. Do you have any badges or mini certifications or, like I said, a kudos channel or something like that, points, gift cards, anything like that for recognizing those learning accomplishments? Okay. What do you do to recognize those? Now, I heard one customer talk about it and they say, well, we pay for the certification exam. That's a recognition. Like, well, yeah, kind of, right? Taking a free exam is a bit of a recognition, but, right, what we want to recognize is the accomplishment out the other side, that they passed the exam, right? And having taken a few of those certification exams myself, I know that they are not easy to pass. And a free exam voucher isn't quite enough when it comes to recognition, at least for me, right, on that. But what is your organization doing for that recognition? All right, our last topic is the one that is often overlooked in organizations. When we talk to other organizations, those first three categories, there's stuff that always comes up. as we're talking about those and they're sharing their best practices. This one is a little harder to implement, but you do need to measure and evaluate those learning outcomes. Okay, remember earlier I was talking about aligning these learning outcomes and objectives with key strategic pillars for our company. Now we got to measure those. How are we measuring these? How do we gather that data? How do we understand what's going on within our organization and their learning? There's a key word in here, and I'm going to pull out my happy little pen here and highlight that one. Regularly. This one is critical. If you're going to roll something out and have people use it, you need to understand, is it working? So if you've got some of those other pieces in place for feedback and understanding where people are, now we can assign some metrics and some data to that and understand not only where do they say they are, but where does the data say they are? Okay, and that's the really key piece here, is understanding where your team is and where you want it to be. Okay, a couple of questions that you can ask yourself about your organization on this one. How are we continuously improving learning at our organization? How are we doing that? How do we know what to improve? Okay, what data are you collecting? That's another really good one. And I know a lot of times folks are like, oh, we got all this data, and you take a look at it and say, yeah, but what does it mean? What questions can we ask of that data? Okay. And the third piece here is what do you do with the data? But it's who decides what changes we should make to the learning in our organization. This kind of ties together with a couple of the other points that I made earlier, but who gets to own this, right? Who gets to make that call? When the data says, when the surveys say we need to change some things, who makes those changes? Who owns that, right? And perhaps it is a committee, right? Perhaps it's a single person. It's different for every organization, okay? Now, one of the things I will tell you about this particular one is in the Cloud Academy dashboards, you can get a lot of this information, a lot of this data. You can ask a lot of questions of that data and see where your learners are. Where are the folks who are progressing through Cloud Academy and leveraging and using a lot of this information, right? Where are they? If you need some help diving into that information, talk to your CSM. Your customer success manager can really point you in the right direction, can help kind of understand where folks are. And I'll be honest with you, is one of the best platforms that I've ever seen for leveraging and understanding some of the data around folks as they're learning and as they're consuming some of that learning. All right, now, as you're moving forward with this sort of stuff, I've given you a couple of questions to think about. We will be sending you a worksheet that has those questions on it, so you can go into that a little bit more. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw those into the questions panel here on GoToWebinar. And I will throw this one up there. As you're typing your questions in there, I do want to encourage you to reach out to your dedicated CSM if you have any questions about the stuff that we've talked about today. If some of those data points sounded really good and you're like, oh, we're good at this one, but we could use some help on this one, reach out to your CSM. We'd be glad to help you understand where you are from some of that data and metrics and where you want to be, right? Love to have those conversations with you, okay? Couple of logistics items before we close it out here. The recording will be shared with you as soon as it's all done in coding and all that magic behind the scenes. We're also going to we'll send that to you via email as well as the worksheet. We are going to pop up a survey right at the end of this, so please give us some feedback on that one. And I saw a question come through here. How do you convince leaders to buy into modeling training? That is a tough conversation, right? But usually the way that I work through something like that is to talk about the business value of it, right? Leaders are often very concerned with, okay, if I pull this lever, what happens on the outcome? So tying those learning objectives into the strategic pillars and then walking that backward to the leaders and saying, look, if we can show that this is important, then our learners, our employees will follow suit, right? So helping them see how it fits into the larger picture. Awesome. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. This concludes our webinar. We're happy to have had you join us today. We appreciate you listening in, and good luck with your learning journey and incentivizing all of that great learning out there. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.